So once again, we're going to take a look at one of my tournament chess games. This was tournament chess game number 7. In this game, we opened up with the Sicilian defense, and I like to play the open Sicilian. So we're going into that. This actually works out to be a dragon. I think this might be a slightly incorrect move order around this area here, or slightly, I would say, incorrect. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but I think it deviates around in here somewhere. So this opening, the idea here is I am kind of waiting on my opponent. I'm playing white, by the way. I'm kind of waiting on my opponent to castle here when I will commit to sending my bishop to h6 and trying to destroy his control over the dark squares in his castled position. Now, most likely it's not too big a deal here to wait for the castling because there's a hole in the c file over here, and him castling queenside is a bit less likely, I believe. So I notice that I have carefully prepared the option to castle to either side, and I could do that at any time. But I really want to wait just to make sure that he castles kingside. So I've been making, I'm kind of delaying that. He's making little delaying moves. And now this presents his capturing the b pawn towards the center here. I actually kind of thought he might capture with the bishop and kind of have that aiming down on my king side. But in the end, he decided to capture towards the center with his b pawn and open up the b file, which I really like for him. It's a pretty good little setup, and it definitely hurts my idea of castling queenside some. So I'm still delaying which side to castle to. I still may castle kingside. I move f3 here, still delaying, waiting on him to commit to a side, which I would much rather he do first. And pretty much the instant he does, my plan is to play bishop h6 if he castles kingside. So he eventually does here, and I go ahead with bishop h6. Now he's going to go ahead and just ignore that. And now the black usually has two options here. One is to capture this and force the queen up into h6, which can be a little bit out of play for a bit. And I think it actually costs an extra move for white. But it also seems a little bit uncomfortable for black to have that queen just right there inside of the dark squares that are already weak. But there's no support, so nothing really is going to happen there until black brings the queen back out of the way and gets some pawn pressure going that direction, in my opinion. So now this b-file pressure that black has created here is a big problem, and I waited for a while to figure out what to do. I did not want to play b3. I still want to castle queenside if I can, but I'm really debating whether I should with the open b-file. b3 would be a typical sort of a blunt of that b-file, blunting of that b-file. However, now you're going to have pieces lined up along the diagonal with his dark square bishop, but his dark square bishop should be going away. It still makes me uncomfortable to have that there. Even the queen could come into that area, and we're going to have some pressure along there, and it's still a big fat hole that I don't want in my castled king's position. In fact, it's the same hole that I am trying to create in his position, and it doesn't make sense to me to create the same hole in my king's side. So I didn't necessarily want to play b3, and I'm quite unsure what to do. Castling here would be okay, but then I'm going to have the immediate pressure. I mean, things like queen b6, and I'm already in some trouble in my mind. So just looking at that, it's my move. I castle, and I'll revert here in a second. If I castle here, here's this, and this is the line I was looking at. I think I've seen this before. I think I've gotten this far in a game before, or very similar to this. This may not have been exactly the same. The position is similar to this. I know I've seen it before. And I'm a little unsure about what black should do here. I'm pretty sure that there is some sort of a standard plan. It might be something like this, and now well, obviously not now because of the queen problem, but even just retreating here, and now you're going to have this, and whatever, come over here, and now you can attack the white, the defender of b2, so white will be in some trouble here. those things are looming, and I'm not saying that they're a direct threat, but they are there, and I was mindful of those when I was choosing my path here. So I found a different way of protecting the b2 pawn and maybe the b file was this move of bishop c4. My idea was it's now a poison pawn for him to take b2 because if he takes b2 then I play bishop b3 trapping his rook in. And if he doesn't play bishop b2 next, then I play bishop b3 and get some extra protection there. And so let's just play out a sample variation here, something like this, and something like this. Now I have to watch for this pawn push, but I don't see a way he can support that right away. See, again, he still can't take b2 because I can sneak in there and trap the rook once again. So those kinds of things are what I was looking at in this line. So to me, this successfully defends b2 and also allows me to castle queenside if I really want to. Even though the bishop, the b file is there, I think putting the bishop on b3 sort of protects that and blunts that attack. So this diagonal also is a pretty active diagonal for the bishop. It controls d5. So overall, I thought this was a good move. It's one of the more pivotal moments in the game, though. So I wanted to go ahead and take a look at this move and maybe point it out for some comments if you have any over this this idea. He mistakenly, I believe, takes the pawn. And he told me after the game that he immediately regretted it when he set it down, and he wasn't sure what I was doing with bishop c4. Like I said, he was a slightly lower rated player, but I think this was the only major oversight that he made in the game. So at this point, in my mind, I'm immediately thinking bishop b3. However, while he was debating what to do there, and he took a long time to make the move, while he was debating what to do there, I was considering what exactly I would do if he did make the rook capture. And I had looked at some lines where he might lash out and capture a pawn on b2, leaving the h6 bishop hanging if I were to recapture here. So in order to prevent that, I went ahead and swapped on g7 as an in-between move, with his rook still able to escape there. However, obviously he can't take time to retreat his rook, so he recaptures, and then I trap the rook. So this is the main line from the game, and at this point, I believe I at least win the exchange. He can always just grab the bishop and get some value out of the rook. But I have a couple of options here of playing knight a4, which I think is worse, and knight d1, both of which attack the rook. And things like queen c1 probably work as well, but it just seemed knight d1 was going to be a cleaner way of doing it. I went ahead and yeah, see, I had calculated him playing c5 in case that's just going to not allow knight a4 to work. So I wasn't surprised at all when he played c5. I was sort of expecting it. It gives his bishop a lot more scope. I went ahead and played knight d1, attacking the rook. Of course, the best thing he can do is grab the material for his rook instead of letting me capture it for free. So that's obviously the smart thing to do. So he comes out of it with a bishop and a pawn for his rook. I have an open file for my rook, a weak a7 pawn as a target. I'm going to bring my knight to c3. I'm going to castle to get my other rook in play. We're going to put some pressure up the a file that I'm not sure he could do a whole lot about. I was in pretty good shape here, in my opinion. I thought I was going to do pretty well. His knight doesn't have a whole lot of scope here. There aren't any places it can jump to. My king will be safe. Overall, I was just pretty happy with my position. I did overlook something that was pretty important, and I continued to overlook it, and it came back and got me. We'll go over that in just a minute. I want to show you the next few moves. Thought this was a mistake. I didn't really see the point, other than maybe he's going to try to keep my king in the center if he can play c4. I just don't know exactly what he was doing, but it allowed me to jump on a chance to trade the queens off, which I did. He has to defend a7. I'm bringing my knight into the game. I'm looking to bring my knight to d5 or to b5 and just be more active. Now, when I said his knight didn't have any scope, he corrects that really quickly, and it's a great move. bringing his knight to e8. At least it seems like a great move to me. I castle. I'm trying to get my other rook in the game. Now he's controlling those two squares that I wanted to bring my knight to. I underestimated the value of that when he was doing it. Of course, I figured out that's what he was doing when he was on e8 because there wasn't much else he could do. There's no other places to bring the knight to after you retreat from f6 to e8. So I assume that's what he was doing, but I missed that it covers a6. So just advancing the pawn allows him to get an extra defender on a6. There's all sorts of little subtle things that it does. So I go rook a1, and now he advances his pawn to get an extra defender to it, and he can also advance the bishop to it, and then his bishop has lots of scope here. His bishop is actually looking pretty good here. His pawn is safe. My rooks are doing nothing. So this sort of fizzled out, and his little plan to support the move to a6 is actually working out really well. And that, I think, is one of the turning points in the game. But there's a bigger one coming up. Now, my thought was I was going to remove one of the defenders of a6, so I went ahead for that. Now, what this does, however, is puts 5 out of my 6 pawns on light squares. And that doesn't seem like too big a deal, but it is. And you'll see that I can easily win a6 at any point once he... And I kind of thought he'd put up a fight for a6, but he decides he has bigger fish to fry, and it's exactly the right thing to do. Bringing his bishop to f5, now he's attacking my pawns. And again, this is another example of me underestimating his chances. I didn't consider this a major threat, and I made one of the sillier moves of the game, to me, c4, which lines up all of the pawns on his color and really fixes them there. There's nothing I can do about it. So now I have real trouble, and this square c2, where his bishop is about to move to, is about to become very critical. And lots of squares around here are going to become really critical. They all happen to be light squares, and then if they aren't light squares, I change it so that they are, which is obviously a big mistake. So he is going to attack my entire pawn chain here with very little I can do about it. Notice that to defend c4 after he takes b3, if he does, I would have to put this rook on a light square. One thing I could really do is to bring my rook over to c1 in order to protect c4. See, because if these pawns start falling, they're all going to fall. So I decided to try to protect that, but again, he's got rook b8. So I'm in even more trouble now. So I decide, part of this was I'm going to attack the bishop. If he were to take b3 with his bishop, then I could move over to b2 with my rook to pin his bishop and then win at the next move. So that's what I thought. For some silly reason, I absolutely just forgot that he could take with his rook instead of with his bishop, which he of course did, which is the obvious move. I don't know what I was thinking. But it leads to disaster, basically. Now he's forking the rook and c4 pawn, and of course if you win the c4 pawn, you get the d5 pawn as a bonus. I can grab a6, which I could have done, you know, it just seemed like I could do it any time during all that sequence, but here it was just basically getting what I could out of a bad situation. And obviously that bishop, there's not a thing I can do about grabbing all those pawns. So they fall very clearly. I'm looking at maybe trying to get e7 if I can, but of course he can play king f6 or king f8, either one. F6 is better, of course. And at this point, I know that I've lost the game. I already know I've lost the game. So I'm trying for tricks or just to see what I can make happen by trying to get my pawns up towards the king, maybe forcing him back, and then at least grabbing e7, and see what else I can make happen. So trying to trap the king, and at this point, the game is over. I'm just going to step through the rest of the game as fairly quickly. He makes lots and lots of solid moves. I make lots and lots of just desperate moves. Towards the end, I played on a lot longer just to see if maybe there was a stalemate in the air somewhere. There wasn't. He kept that possibility at bay, and he eventually queened, and I resigned.